So, as you heard Mark introduce me, I'm Jason Larsen. I'm the founder and owner of Jason Larsen Design. I'm housed here at Ironfront in Lewisburg. I'll lay sort of a quick foundation out. Born and raised in Brooklyn, moved to Syracuse, have a graduate degree in landscape architecture from SUNY ESF in Syracuse, New York. Bounced around, worked in an A&E architecture and engineering firm in Syracuse for a couple of years. Then from there ended up in design and build construction, largely landscape construction. Moved here 2014 for another position. That was going pretty good until 2015. In 2015, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. And no history of epilepsy in my family, so you can imagine that was kind of a shock. Changed everything about my lifestyle, changed the way my family operated. If you can imagine me being a sales designer, estimator, field supervisor, project manager, and trying to handle that when my wife was driving me around with both my kids in the car from morning till late at night. During that episode, when I lost some of my independence, I began to reflect on what would have happened had I had a more significant injury. Because in the long and short, the epilepsy was frustrating and annoying, but it was not debilitating, let's say. But it changed my perception on design. I've been designing for a long time. And I have two uncles who were born with muscular dystrophy. So I've watched them over the years degrade. Started sharing stories about my experiences being, let's say, disabled and having struggles physically and mentally. That was the big thing about the epilepsy. Mentally, it affected me for a while. I couldn't do math. Take me forever to go through and estimating a project. They shared stories with me about what their struggles were and accessibility and getting to people's homes, visiting family and friends. And from there, I started to think about, wow, I've been designing all these projects for years and years for people who have oodles of money, want to spend, build all these elaborate features and landscapes. And I said, man, what would happen if they had an injury? What would happen if they had something like me, but a little bit more serious? And Ted, I think you can relate to this. When you're in the public realm, you design everything around accessibility because of law requirements and regulations. Residential doesn't have those. Residential is exempt, it's its own animal. So began to look at, well, if I design, maybe I should design more universally as a landscape designer. Because here I had all this landscape architecture training in me, in which I'm trained for health, safety, and welfare of the public, but not private residents, right? So I started going back and examining how can I implement universal design, not accessible design, because there's a difference between the two. Accessible design is strictly for accessibility. Universal is for all of us. Universal allows all of us to use something more easily. And it serves the purpose of each person, regardless of age or ability, whether you are of a senior citizen or whether you're a young child. So I started doing this, and I founded the company really around that, to start subtly introducing universal design into projects. And it became the mission for me was to change the philosophy and the approach to landscape design and residential design in general. The purpose would be, hey, I want to make it easier for you now before you can't make it easier for yourself later. Because that's the biggest struggle that people will face later on, is they won't be able to make those changes later on, either because of their physical condition, mental condition, or financially, they're already strapped. Can't make those changes later on. And the big takeaway from this is not only convincing a homeowner to do this now, because they don't see it, they see it as they're invincible, but to look at it from a cost and later on perspective, because statistically, 75% of us in this room are going to have a disability in our lifetime. And that was shocking to me. And I'll just throw one statistic out again real quick. 25% of college students today will be disabled before they reach 55. So if you think about the invincibility factor, it doesn't exist. So that's why I formed Jason Larsen Design. I wanted to help people plan for later on, not just look at today, but look at later on, and be able to do it creatively, subtly, and as opposed to building a giant handicap accessible ramp outside of your home, to do it more creatively, using land and the skill set that I have as a designer, with all the years of experience I have to accomplish that. And I think my time is pretty much up, so I'll just open it up at this point.
I'll start because I'm going.
All right,
I didn't know all those things about you and what you do. So, do you in your marketing? We always saw was obviously your logo there, but or do you find yourself niche marketing to try to find those people with those wants, or?
I approached it. I thought about it that way originally, but I've always looked at this as an educational process. Because I'll have lots of clients who come to me to ask for, hey, I want this. And I look at it and go, well, did you think about, because how old are they now? And one of the key questions I always ask somebody, how long do you plan on being here? Because if this is the home that you're planning to retire in, we need to start planning for some of those future elements. But it even goes beyond that, because you'll have a young couple who might just bought their first house, but they're not thinking about their parents who come and visit. And that's the thing my uncles struggle with, is they can't go visit their own family members because, forget about getting in the house, they can't get to the backyard. They can't get through the fence, either because of topography issues or just because of the materials. And so really, the niche market, as specific as it seems, I think is broader than that in general, because the universal design applies to everything. A patio is a patio, but I can still make that patio universal without any steps or barriers in it. And each site has its own specifics. I can't say 100% of every, that would be impossible. But a large majority of projects, personally, that I've experienced can be modified, if not now or later, can be made that way, if they're willing to be creative about it.
Do you find that bringing your clients into the design aspect is more difficult, less difficult,
I think once they're really reluctant at first, especially the younger you are as a client, the more reluctant they tend to be. A lot of them, when you say universal design to people, immediately they go, well, I'm not disabled. That's the automatic reference, the association they have is to that. I try to bring them in and let them understand that they only see often, Mark, what they have. They don't think about, I can change your land. That's manipulable. I can change that. It's not permanent. So changing a grade here or there can lead to a lot of differences in their living lifestyle. And that's the big part that they miss, you have to educate them on that and what it would mean if I don't have to build a wall. I can do it this way. I can change the land to benefit you, both now and later. And the process is always an integrated process, to allow them to be a participant the whole way through, ideally to keep them in the decision making the entire time.
We had lunch a couple months ago, and I loved your ideas and stuff. We were talking about how a lot of the smaller landscape companies are not able to afford an actual designer. Like,
Right.
and you thought maybe there was a niche there where you could be their designer. Like, have you made any inroads with that sort of idea at all?
Actually, even though what I'm doing now is not specifically geared that way that we originally talked about,
Yeah.
it's the way I am approaching this company, because I don't physically want to build stuff. I'm not in. I'm looking at this more, and I do have some contractors now who want to work with me to facilitate that. And I'm using a term called an IPD, or an integrated delivery, so project delivery, where I team up with them and they team up with me. So I may run the design and I may manage the project, and it's vice versa. So they'll hire me to do the design, but I'll end up managing the project and bringing in skills that we need to get the project done. So I become more of a collaborator than just specifically the design guy. And it's been really good, because they're not expending on the designer full time, but they're getting the skill set and the creativity that they might not have on staff, but I can also help them understand how it goes together. But you'll find that too with a lot of younger guys. They don't know how stuff goes together very well. And there's a little bit of an education curve there too. And when you approach them about the universal design aspect and you tell them about it, it dawns on them like, that's interesting, because that's a whole different market that they hadn't thought about in terms of approach. Yep.
I was kind of thinking along that line as well, and also on maybe toward the bigger contractor end. Have you, the smaller ones who may not want or be able to afford, I'm thinking also on the bigger contractor end where you do have those skills that even the large contractor who has 15 to 20 staff still might not fully understand universal design, would be able to. So have you been able to do some of that? And I guess with that too, is it just central PA, or are you kind of looking beyond central PA?
I'll answer the second part first. And say yes, I'm looking beyond that, because I still have lots of connections back to Central New York, and I've worked previously in Connecticut and New Jersey, so I've got a wider range, long-term goals to do that. And with the way I work, it would work that way. It would be practical. The first part of your question about the larger groups are tricky, because they tend to like to do things the way they do it. And oftentimes they'll already have their own staff and they know what they can produce. Even when you even get to sort of mid-level construction firms, they tend to be very resistant. And I know, because I've been in all of those. I've been in really small, I've been in mid-sized firms, and I've been in a really big firm. They like to have a lot of control over that. And they would be much more reluctant. It's even harder to, and I say that because it's hard for them to experiment even with materials. It's really difficult as a designer to get them to stretch themselves and say, hey, why don't we use this? And because it's unfamiliar, all of a sudden they're looking at the cost for production, because guys aren't familiar with the material, so their installers go, I'm not so sure. But I think as it gets out there, I think you'll see more of that, because the population growth from the 55-year-olds now, which is a 1 in 5, that's going to be a 1 in 3 in 2030, give or take. So you're going to have a 30+ percentage of people who are of retirement age, and there's not enough places for them to live. And the whole aging in place move, those guys are going to end up having to be a part of it, because that's going to be their market eventually. So I think at that point, time frame, that's when they'll be more accepting of doing that.
Yeah, you two are sort of on the same path that I see, because Layton has a green cleaning company, and
Right.
last year when we were talking about that, how to pitch that, we were kind of talking about, do you just go after companies that are interested in green cleaning, or do you become the absolute best cleaning company in the area, and as a bonus, you offer green cleaning? And I think you're kind of on the same wavelength of being the best designer in the area, and thinking, and what comes along with that is higher level thinking, which is universal design, which is integrated into that. And the same with the green cleaning, it's integrated into being the best in the area.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah, very much so.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
My dad and brother own a home building business,
Mhm.
but they branched out from one that started, and I never even would have considered these things you're talking about with my own home. So how do you get, it's such an educational marketing piece to it, like unless you stand there and explain to somebody, here's what I do, here's what I can do for you. Did you ever consider hooking up with, a smaller builder, entrepreneurs or whomever? I'm thinking now they're building a home for a woman that she's like the bionic woman with hips and knees, and
Yeah.
I bet she didn't even she thought about the home accessibility as they're building,
Right.
but never thought about the landscape, the outside.
Mhm.
How,
It's hard because I feel like even now, 5-6 minutes doing this, there's so much to it, and oftentimes I go around and I get frustrated because I see silly things, and it's those silly little things that become huge obstacles for people and it drives me crazy. And now again, I never looked at it that way before, but if you walk around Lintown, everybody's got, this is just an example, right? They have a walkway that might be 40 feet long from the road or from the driveway, and then they have a 6-inch step at the bottom, right at the porch. And that's a very simple example where you could run that walkway right up to the top of that porch, and you would never know it happened. You'd be able to have, but because there's that 6-inch step right there, that person now has to think, if they have a problem later on, how do I get across that one single stinky step?
piece of plywood.
There you go. And for talking to my uncles, it's very frustrating for them. And the older uncle, he's a home designer. So he has seen and dealt with this his whole life, but he's even more exasperated that they're isolated. And to me, that's the bigger part of it. As people get older, and you lose that connectivity between the in and out, where you can't go out of the house because you don't have the means to, or you don't have a space that you can retreat to. Because psychologically, this is what healing gardens are built upon, having people be able to interact with the natural environment. When people lose that connection, that leads to all sorts of problems with folks. It's a therapeutic thing for a lot of people for their mental well-being, because if you can think about, I said, I've worked on projects that are in excess of 6 figures, and they've thrown so much money at something. And the prime example I can think of is if the person had an accident, a debilitating accident that week after their project was all finished and they built all of this that they wanted, and now they can't get to it. Mentally, that would make me crazy. Because you think about how much energy, effort, and passion you put into that thing that is no longer usable for you. Or you're excluding people from it. And there's no reason for it. I had some slides, and it's very easy to accommodate the same features that you could get outdoors for most people would have, whether it's a kitchen or a patio. They can all be adapted to be more simplistic and more usable for everyone.
But I was just thinking of not only safety for the person, but when I go by, there's always this house I go by that has this zigzag of ramps getting up.
Yep.
And I often thought, my gosh, all the theft and everything else around the areas, it's almost like an invitation, come to my house.
That's exactly
Because
what it is.
Yep.
Yeah, there's somebody disabled in the family.
It's very funny. I had this discussion last year at the Lewisburg Garden Club. And I had asked them that question, and I said, if I put a ramp outside your house, what does that tell everybody? If I put a ramp out there, what's the message you're sending? And that's the difference between doing it as a walkway. It's not readable. And they all got it at them. When I said it to them, they all went, "Oh, we're old, or we can't do things." And it's sure. Then you got the security issue, and that's definitely a huge part of it. Steve, did you have something?
Yeah. So you just mentioned you're speaking to the garden club. You're here speaking today. I understand a lot of the education that you do is one-on-one with clients and potential clients. This is kind of a question for the entire room. How else can Jason amplify his voice in educating about universal design? Where else do you go, and any other thoughts?
Yeah, and I actually have been working on a book as part of sort of documenting my journey, and as a means to make awareness of the issue. A lot of people look at architecture, and that's the thing they think of. But I've been in plenty of houses, architecturally, interior, sure, that's all fine. I'm totally compliant inside. I mean, all you have to do is drive around, right? I look at houses and new developments all the time, and big things for me are houses built up here, driveways down here, and how do you do that? But the speaking part, I do have this desire to go out and speak. I'm unusual. I like to talk. And there's a lot. I mean, there's just a lot to try and put out there. And there's a lot of information out there, too, to digest and consolidate down. And again, I think as the population, the demographic continues to change, people will end up being more aware of it and go, wow, what do we do? What do we do with this?
Do you offer, I guess, on Steve's point, I immediately think of, because it's really interesting to think about, and I think it's something that unless you, or a family member that's close to you has, quote-unquote, disability, you may not be thinking about this a lot,
Right.
but it's all around us. So, this is interesting for us to think about. Could you offer something at whether it's free or whatever, some educational, something nice, something fairly maybe short or lengthy, whatever you want to do. Something educational that's universal for me at my house, Mike at his house, Steve at his house, something to think about, whether we're planning an addition, whether we're planning to move, whether building a new house, whatever the case may be. Is there something that you can develop, design, maybe you probably have a lot of it already, that you can offer up to not only draw attention, some attraction to your business, but also to just get it out there that you are not only a great designer, but you also serve this niche that maybe some of the others don't.
And Ted, is there room to work in with commercial at all?
Absolutely, yeah. I was thinking earlier too. I see, like, as I'm just sitting out looking at the town around us, is one market area I would see where you could play a huge role would be approaching communities about universal design. And Lewisburg would be a natural starting point because we tend to be a little more thoughtful in general. But if you just look at streetscape projects, for instance, they go to Larsen Design and they just engineer from day one. They don't think out of the box. They think, on a micro level, each intersection, is accessible, but they're not. Where Jason could actually make a community actually think holistically about how do we make our community more universally, accessible. And I would think that would be one where we could actually even, partner and team, because it kind of verges into more commercial stuff, but Jason as a kind of leader of that whole discussion, I think that could be a really interesting area to go into.
You guys talking about this in Syracuse, around the university, both at SU and ESF, up there they have the audible crosswalks. So when you have the ability to walk across, it'll chirp at you, and the pace will change as you're running out of time. And it's really one of the few places I've actually experienced or seen that, or heard that, I guess is more appropriate. With things like as simple as that, just even from a traffic control standpoint, and allowing people who have visibility issues to be able to navigate even Market Street.
You and I talked about this before, and one thing people don't usually think about, we think about an older relative that might need accessibility, but I live in Danville, there's a hospital right there, and there are a lot of people recovering from surgery for all kinds of things. I met a gentleman a year ago, 17-year-old daughter was in a car accident. They had to change the house in a very short period of time. So there's that group of something could happen suddenly and it's going to cost you money versus looking ahead as to what if Dad has to come stay for a couple of weeks. Not even necessarily move in with you, but what does that look like? And it saves you money if you don't have to do it overnight.
Yeah.
Jason, I think time.
Yeah.
So we always have to end with the question of, as a community, what can we do for you? So I'll leave the answer to that question.
Well, I think we talked about a lot of that. The biggest thing that I've been even actively doing right now is collaborating with others, because the nature of what I'm doing is a collaborative environment. A resource like Ted, a resource like Titus. Titus and I have been speaking about him even fabricating stuff for my projects, whether that be railings or handrails and things of that nature, or even sculptural elements. And so that's sort of where I'm at in terms of just using the resources here at Ironfront amongst fellow members to put skill sets together, to build teams to tackle certain things, because there's certainly things I can't do. There's things I don't want to do. And really just maybe not the typical sort of referring me to people, but even more looking for places and opportunities to speak and educate people on what this is. Because I think that for me is actually even more important than it is the financial part of it, to be honest. I mean, I'm not writing the book for the financial gain, because that's not the purpose behind it. The purpose in my heart was to educate people about this before it was too difficult and too hard for people.
Great.